Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. My name is Oak Mountain, and I'm your host. This marks another installment of Oak's Hour, a series where I distill the information and wisdom from the 3 previous episodes, these being with Kim Hayden, Anja Rose, and Leah Fink. Each of these guests were invited on to speak to meaning and the feminine, and what it means to be a woman and the challenges therein in the modern world. Now, this is my attempt to distill the information, experiences, and wisdom that I have gained from these 3 women, and to offer my learnings to you. The obvious caveat being, I'm not a woman, and thus my take will be limited by my manhood to an irreconcilable degree. That said, I do believe that the inquiries and explorations herein will remain valuable. So, I hope you enjoyed the episode. To start off, and with all of our Oak's Hour episodes, we're going to be exploring several questions to work our way through the distillation process of the wisdom gained by the conversations with our previous guests. And the first question that I want to tackle is, how do societal expectations shape sense of self, particularly for women? And in order to answer that, we actually have to break it down into 2 questions. The first being, what are societal expectations, and how do they specifically target women? Now, note out the gate, I will use societal expectations and social expectations interchangeably throughout the episode, so just keep that in mind. So, these societal expectations are mental constructs reflected in behavior, habits, language, art, and social systems that are indicative of beliefs and values held by that group or society. They also have particular characteristics. They are moralistic, meaning they deal with morals, ethics, the good and the bad, and they presume this right and wrong, good and bad, and they also presume to know what actions will lead to those ends. Another quality of these societal expectations is that they are transmissive. That means to say that they pass between groups and people. They do so vertically through inheritance and horizontally through the exchange of cultural ideas through exposure. Societal expectations, when articulated, are done so as propositional beliefs. That is to say, they are statements about the world, statements that are supposed to be true, they are propositions, and they are believed, they are accepted as true. And when they are expressed as propositional beliefs, they are characteristically reductive, and they tend towards neglecting the nuance that arises from circumstantial considerations. Now, what do I mean by this? Neglecting the nuance that arises within circumstantial considerations. If we imagine that we offer a single sentence that describes how things ought to be for a large number of people, we are necessarily reducing the inherent and innate complexity of all of those individuals such that that single sentence applies to them unilaterally. Now, I will mention that not all social or societal expectations are culturally generated. I mentioned before that they are mental constructs, but not all are culturally generated, as we have built-in expectancies about others and the environment that are brought to us through our genetic heritage. To get a greater sense of what I mean by a biological expectancy, I would turn you towards the book, The Continuum Concept. Now, this book changed my perception of human development as well as human psychology, and it lays out beyond the shadow of a doubt, at least in my perception, that we are born with built-in expectancies about the world and about others. Okay, so before moving forward, I want to address the relationship between expectations, which we've been speaking about already, and impressions. Now, an impression is how something lands. This is an experience or an idea. It's our sense of something. And I can give you an example of this. Let's say that I invited you over for coffee and I said to you, hey, when you arrive, please do not ring the doorbell or knock on the door, as my dog, Brutus, is very territorial. Some of you might have an image come to mind when I say such a thing. You might see maybe a Doberman or a Rottweiler or some sort of pit breed, a German Shepherd perhaps, maybe even a Belgian Malinois, that is tough and territorial and ready to guard the door. That's an impression based solely off of my word choice and the tone with which I delivered them. Now, that impression will change and shape your expectations. Although this wouldn't be considered a social expectation, the only difference between this expectation of what kind of dog you expect to see at my door and a societal expectation is that societal expectations are held by many people about the members of their society. So you might be surprised when you come to my door and you see a fluffy little Pomeranian ready to greet you. Now, as we develop our impressions shape our expectations. The strength of this is much stronger during the developmental years. And eventually, although not inevitably, these expectations grow thick enough to then reshape our impressions. It becomes a vicious and closed cycle. We receive repeated impressions. This shapes what we come to expect. And then, when we experience even a novel event, our impression is confined by the weight of our expectations. The less one is aware of this phenomenon, the sooner their mind closes to new and meaningful ideas and experiences. This is a sad state indeed. Now, it must also be said that all members of a group or society will be subject to social expectations insofar as they are perceived by or projected on by other members of their group. That is to say, if you exist in a group and you do belong to it, and you are perceived, experienced by, and interact with the other members therein, there will necessarily be social expectations. I believe this to be the case even in the smallest unit of grouping, being a couple or a single relationship. And anyone inside of a romantic partnership will know the tumultuous role that unspoken expectations can play inside of that small unit. As it pertains to the experience of women specifically and the projected expectations that they receive in the West, well, what are they? I've done my best to compile the following non-exhaustive list based on the sharing that I received from my sisters, family members, friends, as well as the guests that I spoke to, and included my own perceptions of media and culture in the West. Some of the things that I collected are the ideas and expectations that women are to stay at home, to tend to that home, to bear children, to be a wife and a mother, to nurture and teach, to be a helper and aid to their husband. This is emotional and domestic labor, and to be second to his will or a follower. There are expectations that women are more emotional, more sensitive, or more attuned to that emotional realm. There's expectations of being more creative, more intuitive, less strong, fragile, or even delicate, sometimes less educated and less intellectual or less interested in the intellectual pursuits, and sometimes even expected to be foolish or naive. A common one that I've heard as well is that they are expected to be more passive, permissive, and agreeable. Now, this is not a complete list, nor do I purport to accept any of these expectations as reasonable. I state them simply as they exist. So with this list in hand, then, we're brought to our next question. How do these expectations influence women's self-perception and a sense of self-worth? Well, so much of what we believe about ourselves comes through the impressions we received from our environment during our development. We are informed, perhaps just formed, by how our expressions are received by the world. Baby cries, mom comes, love is here, world is safe. Child acts out, receives gentle yet firm parenting and guidance and reassurance. I'm still loved, the world is safe. Our schemas, these are the little boxes of understanding that we have in our psyche. The schemas for what we are will be largely open and rudimentary as children. We might have a schema for human, female, daughter to, maybe a nationality like American or Canadian, or a sense of group identity along the lines of religious affiliation, being Catholic, Sikh, or Muslim. What it means to be those things is given to us from the outside. Now, I want to offer a quick clarifying caveat. Meaning is a mental phenomenon that requires a true relationship with reality. I'll say that again. Meaning is a mental phenomenon that requires a true relationship with reality. It's made up of thoughts and thus of propositions which can have their trueness tested. Human is human, even if we have no words for it. Woman is woman, even beyond rhetoric and philosophy. And yet, much of what informs these meaningful categories, rightfully or wrongfully, can and will come through culture, home life, media, and social tradition. Thus, those pieces of culture that inadvertently or sometimes directly set a standard for what makes someone woman enough have been disastrously unfiltered and pervasive in the lives of girls for far too long. In listening to sisters from various walks of life, I've learned that all of them subsumed pieces of these distorted expectations while they grew, and that all of them endured some degree of suffering, some for decades, as a result of attempting to adhere to reductive societal expectations at the cost of their own authenticity. The result of which, as far as I've seen, has been depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse, body dysmorphia, unhealthy sexual and relational habits, chronic self-hatred, and an overall sense of lack and of scarcity. Now, again, to clarify, not all societal expectations, when accepted, lead to these dark ends. But some of them do, and identifying which generate genuine suffering with zero positive benefit is an important social task that I do believe is being addressed presently in our culture. But in addressing these, we're faced with another question. How can these detrimental societal expectations be overcome? Well, I would offer you this. Firstly, identify with scrutinous clarity the helpful from the harmful. That is to say, what is being said? Where is it being shared? And what are the consequences of adhering to this belief if we took it all the way to its logical conclusion? I say scrutinous clarity because it might be the case that a societal expectation feels uncomfortable to receive because of one's own blocks or biases. But even in that case, it could be that that expectation remains valuable. Once the harmful ones have been identified, we must acknowledge them when they are shared. This is to say, hey, that's a projected and unhealthy expectation. Speaking to them stops their unconscious transmission, and this might very well be a genuine and authentic responsibility of each of us as we participate in our culture. Okay, what now? We've identified and we have acknowledged them verbally when they come up. Well, next, gather to birth meaningful alternatives. Each lie that leads you to suffer in solitude can find its antidote in the power that flows from community. In connection, stories are shared and truth is revealed. The hearts and minds of others can be the checks and balances for ideas, both new and old. You know, I learned recently that the more often that women gather and the greater the number with which they gather correlates to longer life expectancy for all women involved. I find that absolutely outstanding. Okay, so we've gathered then. We've shared our ideas, our truths in circle with those who are able to bring forth their own wisdom to test. Now comes the sharing and the teaching of that new. Living your life aligned with the truths and opportunities and expectations that will take you to the healthiest expression of your womanhood is a powerful and influential act. This is because we are culture. We are creators and disseminators of it. Thus, as a woman, you decide through your thoughts, your words and actions, the influence that you have on the world. And all of that comes down to what you choose to believe or reject about what is true, good, and right for you, your family, and for society. This is power. This is the power of choice and the power of lived expression. And now power means and feels differently for different people. And the balance of power, of force, and of influence is dynamic and varies across all aspects of human experience. So if some of these societal expectations then result in the disempowerment of girls and women, they may also contribute to the disbalance of influence in relationships, in homes, and in society, which leads me to my next point of inquiry. What exactly are power dynamics, and how do they impact how a woman relates to herself and to the world? Well, in episode 7, I speak with Leah Fink, and when I was speaking with her, she told me that power is our influence on the world. And this is certainly one way to conceptualize power, and I think for the purposes of honing in on our topic today, it was sufficient. So then, if power is one's influence on the world, their body and mind included, then one is never completely without power. We always have the power to choose how we relate to the given moment and to our life. This last statement mirrors the message that comes out of A Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor Frankl, where he highlights very clearly that the one thing that cannot be stripped from anybody is how they relate to their circumstance. And I think that that is one of the most powerful expressions of power, one of the most powerful articulations of power I've come into contact with. Okay, so if power is this, the influence, then what is a power dynamic? Well, a power dynamic refers to the relative influence between two or more parties. The greater the differential, the more responsibility rests on the one with greater influence to act with care, respect, and goodwill. Okay, I believe it to be true that some societal expectations shape how women are perceived, and that they do so by shaping people's impressions. If those impressions are shaped to be diminutive or subjugating, thus generating expectations of smallness or incompetency, then it is both harmful and has the influence to generate the dynamic of power in favor of the other inside that relationship. It can be noted that some societal expectations shape impressions towards the positive, towards an expectancy of capability, capacity, and skill. Now, with that said, anytime that there is any bias, that is to say, a shaped impression, then there's a risk that the authentic connection that could be possible will be missed, and at worst, that the rights and dignity of one party in that dynamic could be violated. It's this compromise to authenticity that is, in my estimation, the crux of any disempowerment that may occur. If someone projects a limited view onto somebody else, expects specific behavior and responses, then the unique value of the one being projected on will go unseen and unacknowledged in that interaction. The very same thing happens when a woman holds limiting beliefs about herself. If you move through the world believing in an inherent lack given to you by distorted parts of your cultural environment, then you're going to impress upon your interactions and your relationships the expectations that follow from believing that you are less than or not enough. You can be treated poorly. You can tolerate disrespectful or abusive behavior. You might stagnate in positions that are below your skill level or settle. This settling, it keeps the richness of your authenticity and your unique gifts away from the world. And it keeps the gifts of self-acceptance, of a sense of wholeness, and of being received away from you. As the first half of our show sets in, I wanted to thank you for listening to the Smiling Human podcast. This show would not be possible without the support of listeners like you. Liking and following on YouTube, sharing with a friend, or following on your local podcast app are all easy and simple ways that you can support this show and help it grow into the future. If you do want to support this show directly, you can consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Patrons get perks like early access to all episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and access to live Q&As with me. If this feels within your means, then please consider becoming a patron. Now let's get back to the show. So far, we've defined societal expectations, defined what and how they operate, and how they work to shape a sense of self. We looked at how these societal expectations, when accepted and held about self or other, can generate or even exaggerate power differentials in all types of relationships with differing results. And as such, I would like to address the following question. How can individuals navigate the balance and tension between authentic and empowered living and societal expectations and responsibilities? Well, a few relevant pieces of information will need to be made clear before any of us can hope to answer this question. Firstly, what exactly is meant by authenticity and empowerment, although we touched a little bit on it so far briefly. Second, which societal expectations are valuable to uphold insofar as they indicate real responsibilities of an individual? And thirdly, how does one identify balance? Let's begin with authenticity and empowerment. Authenticity could be described as the expression of a being who is free to be exactly as they are in the moment. There's an absence of conflict between what is happening, what is felt, and what is expressed. It is the real trueness of a being put forward into the world. Empowerment, then, would be the state of having the fullness of your influence accessible to your will in each moment, as well as perhaps the awareness of that accessibility. So to live authentically and empowered is to live as an expression of your realness and your truth, connected to your capacity to enact change and influence within the domain of your life. There is a wrinkle that arises in my mind that I believe merits addressing. Your truth is the truth of what's happening in your experience, not a single opinion or a collection of opinions or beliefs or propositions. And I can illustrate it this way. I am the King of England. If I claim this as my truth, I am being both dishonest and delusional. To make this a meaningful expression of my truth, I would have to say that I believe I am the King of England, or I'm aware of the belief that I am the King of England. Now, if a statement is true about the world, it's truth. If a statement is false, but you believe it, it doesn't make it your truth. Your truth then becomes that you believe a lie. The most successful way of honestly articulating what could be understood as one's truth is to describe the inner world. Describing the inner world, rather than making proclamations about self, other, or the world at large, drives your expression away from the egoic and delusional and towards authenticity. Now, with that being said, we can move to the second part of this inquiry, which was which societal expectations are valuable to uphold insofar as they indicate real and necessary responsibilities of an individual. Given the variety of cultural backgrounds of this audience and the uniqueness of each of your experiences, I'll say this. I encourage you to answer this for yourself, as you will know best what societal expectations are present in your world and which of them have made their way into your life and your mind, and thus you are the most qualified to find any gold inside of them, if there is gold to be found. It's important that you do this contemplative exercise with the specifics of your circumstance, as the specificity will refine and clarify the targeted balance at which you aim. Note, I believe that individuals within a society have responsibilities to themselves, their family, and other members of that society. I also believe that some societal expectations indicate what these responsibilities are. So identifying them will offer you a counterbalance to what follows from the question, what does it look like for me to live authentically and empowered? In both of my conversations with Kim Hayden in episode 5 and Anja Rose in episode 6, the thread of claiming and ownership arose. And I believe this has a lot to do with authenticity and empowerment. Kim spoke to the need to own one's story, such that one's future is not limited by the tragedies of the past. This is an example of power within the domain of one's life. The power and the influence to affect how one acts is, in essence, the power to author your future. And when I spoke with Anja, she addressed the necessity for women to become intimately familiar with the needs and wants of their body and heart, rather than waiting or expecting for their partners to meet those needs. Again, this is an example of power within the domain of one's life. By familiarizing yourself with your wants and needs, you edge closer to full, authentic living. Knowing the truth of you allows for that truth to be more aptly expressed and thus increases the chances of your needs being met. All of this is within your power to do. What it takes is full ownership of what is yours. Now, all of this has led me to yet another question. Surprise, surprise. And this question, I believe, will help us address the third part of our previous inquiry, which was regarding balance. How is it that we identify what is ours, such that when we claim it, we can come into a unique lived expression of balance? Well, what is ours comes through several channels, and let's take a look at 3 of them. 1, what is given to only us? This is our body, our mind, the uniqueness of our being, our likes, memories, emotions, imaginings, hopes, rights, and responsibilities, the experience of life from your perspective. 2, that which is inherited. This is your place within your family constellation, your ancestry, the character of your parental and sibling relationships, your genetic inheritance, history, and traditions. 3, your piece of the commons. This is the space for you in this world, your opportunity to participate in myriad groups that make up human society, that include a sense of belonging, the experience of relating, the opportunity to contribute to the greater tapestry of humanity. I believe that it is the relationship between the first aspect and the following 2 where we will find what is needed to generate balance between authentic empowered living and societal expectations. The second 2 aspects are external to one's own mind and body and constitute, at least in part, the environment from which both the helpful and the harmful social expectations can be found. Your inner world, that is the first aspect, is the source of your authenticity and your light. Thus, bringing any expectation into conversation with that luminous authenticity constitutes the act of balancing. Asking questions like, what is best for me right now and into the future? What is most real for me, and does this expectation honor that? Where am I living for others at the cost of my own power and the cost of my own authentic expression? And are there environments or relationships that are limiting or rejecting my authenticity? By asking questions like these, you will begin the process of assessing your unique expression of balance. Remember, we do not want to throw out all social narratives, expectations, and traditions because some of them are genuinely and meaningfully informative. However, taking the time to drop into your body, your being, and listen deeply to what is there will support you in identifying which of these social expectations to honor and which ones are ready to be released. Okay, let's see where we've landed so far. Societal expectations are held in the mind of individuals, and they're acted out through culture and through social systems. These societal expectations are transmissive, both vertically and horizontally, meaning that they're shared across groups and passed down over time. They can carry within them indicators of genuine value and responsibility, and they can also be restrictive, reductive, and toxic to the healthy development of a woman in society. This toxicity can lead to an atrophying of authenticity and an endemic of disempowerment, as well as distorted dynamics of power inside of relationships. We've landed on one apparent antidote, and this antidote flows from awareness. Firstly, acknowledging what is happening when it comes to societal expectations and their consequences. Secondly, the aware act of recognizing the innate capacity and power you have in claiming what is truly yours, insofar as it opens the gates to actionable steps towards greater authenticity and empowerment. You have a great deal of power in your life, even more than you might realize or be using at present. We saw too that the suffering that flows from subsuming these harmful social expectations can be rectified, at least in part, by acting on the knowledge of your innate power and sharing that potency in community and connection with others. I want to close this episode by offering you a question for your own contemplations. In the midst of navigating societal expectations, power dynamics, and the quest to live a fulfilling, authentic life, what can you move on from that will free up the space and energy for you to move more greatly in alignment with your luminous inner truth? Thanks for listening to this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing on YouTube or giving a follow on your local podcast app. I know I said it in the mid-roll, but I'll say it again. If you'd like to support this show directly, you can do so at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. You'll gain access to perks like early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes content, as well as access to live Q&As. Also, I've just produced an insight journal and I want to give it to you for free. You can find access to this month-long personal development journal in the link below. This is in the show notes or in the YouTube description. Also, if you feel inspired by the sharing that has taken place in conversations like this, and you want to work with me directly, you can find a link to a free call below. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again.